The forgotten war, overshadowed for years by hotter, sexier stories and declining public interest, is making a media comeback. With 68,000 U.S. troops being sent to Afghanistan, rising casualty rate, and the top military commander describing the situation as serious, the Afghan war is becoming harder for journalists to ignore, even though few news organizations have ponied up to send correspondents to Kabul. It's an expensive and dangerous assignment, as underscored by the roadside bomb that recently injured CBS's Cami McCormick. But as the Obama administration considers sending even more troops, the shape of the debate on the air and in the newspapers may suddenly be changing from how to subdue the Taliban to whether we should be there at all. George Will breaking with most conservative commentators this week and calling for an American withdrawal. Lara Logan is just back from Afghanistan, where she traveled with U.S. soldiers who are attempting to provide security for the country's elections.
The polls have just closed. Voting has now ended, and the Marines haven't found a single person in this part of Helmand Province who actually voted. It's exactly what the Marines expected. They had to move through the open ground. They took small arms fire.
And CBS News' chief foreign affairs correspondent joins me now. Welcome, Lara Logan. Based on your recent trip to Afghanistan, based on the spotty media reports we get back home, do most Americans have a clear picture of the obstacles and conditions that the U.S. forces face there?
No, I don't think they do. I mean, in spite of the best efforts of a lot of journalists, the Iraq war overshadowed Afghanistan for so long. Right after the Iraq invasion, I went back to Afghanistan and lived there for over a year and did 3 stories on 60 Minutes when no one else was covering it, really. The problem is that until you're there, it's so hard to describe the obstacles. Just the physical conditions of trying to fight a war in that country are so overwhelming. It's very hard to communicate that. Even, on television, you can't smell it, you can't feel the dirt, you can't feel the heat.
47 American soldiers killed in August, the deadliest month since the Afghan war began. I mentioned earlier your colleague being injured. How dangerous a place is it right now for journalists? Is it like Iraq at the peak of that conflict?
It's more dangerous than Iraq at the peak of that conflict. I think so, because in the years in which America's attention was turned to Iraq, that gave the Taliban and Al-Qaeda all the breathing room they wanted. The country was awash with landmines anyway. Now it's awash with landmines and IEDs, and they're getting a lot of help from across the borders, and they're very, very dangerous, very deadly weapons that are being used there. It's a myth that deep buried IEDs and all that technology migrated from Iraq to Afghanistan.
For years, news organizations have not been terribly interested in Afghanistan. I'm sure you tried to get some stories on the air and had difficulty with that. The last couple of weeks, that seems to be changing. Why?
Well, it's not just the last couple of weeks. I think it's been the last year. It's been changing. And I never had any trouble getting a story about Afghanistan on the air once I'd done it. It's doing it. It's getting there. It's overcoming the incredible cost of covering that story, especially when you had 2 wars. It's changing now because I think, with the Iraq war being seen in many ways as a failure, people's patience...
And certainly winding down, at least as far as the U.S. involvement, yeah.
And winding down. And the attention has turned to Afghanistan, and people are not so patient now. They're like, well, we've been there 9 years. You mean to tell me it's worse now? Are you kidding? I mean, why were we lied to for all these years? Because it was getting worse every year. From the day of the invasion, we started making mistakes. Once that was successful, from then we started losing.
If we were lied to, why didn't the American media make more of that?
Well, I know a lot of journalists who tried. It's very hard to prove a lie. When commanders are telling you we have enough troops, you know they don't have enough troops, but no one will tell you that on camera or on the record. How do you prove that that's a lie? When commanders are telling you it's not that the Taliban's stronger, it's that we're more successful, all you can do is to try and prove that that's not the case.
On Friday, a controversy exploded over an Associated Press photo of a 21-year-old Marine who had just been hit in Afghanistan, in Helmand Province, where you were, on August 14th by a rocket-propelled grenade. This is Lance Corporal Joshua Bernard of New Portland, Maine. Defense Secretary Robert Gates, I am told, was livid, and he's not a hothead. He was livid, his spokesman says, over the AP putting out this very graphic photo. Gates called the president of the AP, Tom Curley. He virtually begged him not to run this photo, which whose release the family had opposed. The AP stuck by his decision, sent the picture out. Let me read to you and to our viewers from a letter sent by Secretary Gates to the AP. I cannot imagine the pain and suffering Lance Corporal Bernard's death has caused his family. Why your organization would purposefully deny the family's wishes, knowing full well that it will lead to yet more anguish, is beyond me. Your lack of compassion and common sense in choosing to put this image of their maimed and stricken child on the front page of multiple American newspapers is appalling. Should that photo have been released? I showed it to you earlier.
Well, first of all, when you embed with the U.S. military, you sign a set of rules, and those rules clearly state that if a soldier is wounded or dies from his wounds, then you have to have the permission of the family in order to publish an identifying photograph. If you're not going to obey the rules, you really shouldn't sign them. On the other hand, I mean, there are judgment calls in everything that we do. We like to think that it's a purist form. You know, the media isn't. And the AP made a judgment call. I guess they felt that freedom of speech was being violated, and that's really their decision.
The director of photography for the AP says it was our journalistic duty to show the reality of the war there, however unpleasant and brutal that sometimes is. And, you know, there are critics who say that the American media have sanitized both the Iraq War and the Afghan War, that we don't see enough pictures of these injuries. But on the other hand, you've got to think of the family of this 21-year-old kid.
It's a very difficult question, but one of the good things is that we can now show pictures of coffins coming back, those kind of images that were banned for so many years.
There was a long legal battle over that.
That was very important, though.
Are you surprised that George Will and some other pundits are now saying, let's pull out of Afghanistan? Afghanistan was always positioned as the good war. We went in after 9/11. We knew who we were fighting. Didn't have initially the controversy that surrounded the Iraq invasion.
I'm not surprised. It's purely political. Come on, he's a conservative commentator. You now have a Democratic president in power, and he's suddenly against the war.
But a lot of Republicans have supported this war, even under President Obama.
Because that was their position. But, I mean, would George Will be doing this if it was still a Republican president? I don't know. I doubt it.
Is it hard for the American media to stay interested in a war that has dragged on now for more than 8 years?
Absolutely not. It's not hard to stay difficult in Afghanistan. It is, I mean, what the Marines and the soldiers are going through there, what the Afghan people have been through, is so overwhelming.
Do the Marines feel ignored by the fact that the networks don't have bureaus in Kabul the way they did in Baghdad? Do they feel like they're fighting and in some cases dying?
Howie, the Marines are living without electricity, without water, without food. I mean, are you kidding? They don't even have any idea what the media is doing. I mean, it doesn't even factor into their daily lives. Just getting through each day is so hard that that's the challenge.
And as you say, it's hard, even with the best writers, the best television reporters, to convey that reality. It's over 100 degrees there, and just the conditions just sound awful. You have an 8-month-old baby. I just saw her look very cute. He looks very cute. Did you hesitate to go back into a war zone?
I didn't hesitate, but it is very hard. It is. I mean, everything has changed, and I think about not coming home. I think about that child growing up without a mother, and that's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done.
And yet you felt compelled to go?
No question about it.
That's your job?
I'm going back tomorrow.
You're going back tomorrow. Lara Logan, thanks very much for joining us and sharing with us your reporting experience there. And this program, note, Anderson Cooper is in Afghanistan for a series of special reports that will be airing on CNN this week.